Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. Well, welcome to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. My guest today is Nancy Pearl. Nancy was recommended to me by multiple listeners. They said you got to try to get her on. She's going to be difficult. She's hard to reach. Good luck. No, I'm kidding. But multiple listeners said we should try to get Nancy Pearl on the show. Reached out to you, Nancy. You were kind enough. You responded pretty quickly, frankly, and appreciate that. So, got to try to introduce you, and this is what's impressive. This is from your Wikipedia page,
which I did not write.
I know you didn't. That's the whole point. You can't write your own Wikipedia. I tried to give myself a Wikipedia. No, right. I kid. You can't do this. So I'm just going to read a little bit. Nancy Pearl is an American librarian, best-selling author, literary critic, and the former executive of the Washington Center for the Book at Seattle Public Library. Okay. Going to bounce over here to the Seattle Times article where the headline reads, Nancy Pearl, Seattle's most famous librarian, looks back on a lifetime of books. Nancy, as I've read about you, you realized at 10 that you wanted to be a librarian. As a 10-year-old, I was an avid reader. I am an avid reader. I was an avid reader. I grew up in Tacoma, and we had a summer book club, and the library that my mom and dad and I went to for like 4 years running, I read more books than every other kid in that library, et cetera, et cetera. So I have this kind of interest that at 10, and you grew up in Detroit, and this is a really long introduction, isn't it? But basically, can we just talk about that for a second? At 10, how about really quickly, between 10 and college, did you ever change your mind? Did you ever think I wanted to be an astronaut or something else?
Well, certainly not an astronaut because physics, beyond me. But I didn't change my mind. I had one when I was in college. I was really taken with Noam Chomsky's theory of English grammar, the transformational grammar that was being developed then. And I really thought, wow, wouldn't that be great to go to MIT and, get a doctorate and do all that. And then I realized that, I'm pretty smart, but I'm not an intellectual, and I don't respond to things analytically. I respond to them viscerally all the time. And then I immediately knew that I had to be a librarian, and I wanted to be a librarian because I wanted to be a children's librarian because my childhood library, the Parkman Branch Library in Detroit, Michigan, in the northwest part of Detroit, those librarians were so good to me. They were really, I was really a miserably unhappy child. I never wanted to go home. And they just were kind to me. And I thought, I want to do for other kids. I mean, they opened the world, especially Miss Whitehead, just opened the world to me. And she would come up to me. I mean, all I read were horse and dog books when she met me. I was like 9 or 10. And, in fact, if you and I, Scott, went to the Parkman Branch Library, I could show you where in the library, in the children's section of the library, the horse and dog books were kept because they were pulled out of the regular children's fiction collection. Anyway, Miss Whitehead would say, she would come up to me and she would say, Nancy, we just got in a brand new horse book. Do you want to be the first person in this library to read this book? And I would say, yes. And, I'd hold my hands out for the book and she'd say, oh, wait a second. There's a book I want you to read first. And then she was Canadian. She loved British children's fiction. And so by that sort of, by that method,
right.
bait and switch, the first example of bait and switch I think that I ever encountered. She gave me the Mary Poppins book. She gave me The Hobbit. She gave me, the Swallows and Amazon series, all this British fiction and the best of the children's fiction. She had me read all the Newbery Award winners, and all my interests were really helped to develop by Miss Whitehead. And so that's what I wanted. And, in fact, I did become a children's librarian, and my first job after library school at the University of Michigan was back at the Detroit Public Library. And I would have given a lot if I could have worked with Miss Whitehead at the Parkman Branch Library. But instead, that was not to be. But I worked on the bookmobile, and I was her colleague, until she died. And, that was very, very meaningful to me.
That's awesome. Now, somewhere in my research, I read this part. It kind of, I think, will be a nice bridge. But basically, when you were 13, I think it was, she introduced you to the adult librarians.
She did.
And the first book that you checked out was Gone with the Wind.
It was.
And so I kind of have this mental vision of, you being escorted over and handed off to the care of other librarians, and her work with you is done now. And right. you are now being shepherded over to this side of the library and to this world.
That's exactly the way it was. I mean, it was the library was kind of based on a Carnegie Library model, although it was not a Carnegie Library, where you entered and what you saw right in front of you was the checkout desk, the circulation desk. And then on one side was the children's room, and on the other side was the adult room. And Miss Whitehead actually, my memory is, walked me over and said, I want you to meet blah, 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 and just turned me loose. Now, regretfully, I think she, was sad about it not because, it wasn't anything like she didn't want me to read certain books or anything like that, but, that she didn't want me to give up the children's books that she and I loved so much. And I didn't.
Okay.
So
why? No, well, I won't. I'm leading you in a direction. So why the University of Michigan?
Oh, well, it was, well, first of all, I got a scholarship there. Okay. So that paid for my library school. Okay. And second of all, it was a very good library school. Michigan, I graduated, my undergraduate degree was from there. My husband, my husband was getting his doctorate there. So just, there was no place else I would want to go.
All right. So this is the question I have for you.
Yes.
Are you willing to sing the Ohio State fight song?
I hate Ohio State.
Okay.
I mean, you could always, when I go on these daily long walks, and I always wear my Michigan cap, which is just an M.
The M.
What you say when you meet another Michigan person is "Go Blue," and it turns out there's a lot of people in the Seattle area who have gone blue, and it's just so much fun.
So what do you do if you see an Ohio State?
Yeah, right. I avert my eyes.
You go on the other side of the street. You go across. Right. Okay.
But I have to say, I was waiting for the Apple store to open a few years ago, and we went in there, and this person said, "Well, this guy, young guy, said, well, I don't really want to help you," and I said, "Really? Why? Because I'm like your grandmother or something?" And he said, "No." He said, "I went to Ohio State." So
I love it. I love it.
But of course, he did help me. He was very nice.
Of course, no, it's good. I went to Central Washington University here. Okay, so I can root for or against the Huskies and the Cougars. I can jump on whatever bandwagon without any sort of guilt. But my friends that went to the UW or went to WSU, man, it splits households apart during Apple Cup week. Sure. It's kind of fun, and I like the whole college rivalry thing. So when you were at Michigan, did you ever go to a football game there?
Yes. Roger Staubach was the Navy quarterback, and when Michigan played Navy, I think when I was a junior, I think I got tickets to that. And then the apartment that my husband and I had was within walking distance of the football stadium.
Okay.
So you couldn't leave on football Saturdays, because you could never get a parking place until long after the game was over.
Because if memory serves me, doesn't that stadium hold over 100,000 people?
Yeah, I think 103,000.
And it's massive. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I had to tease you about the Ohio. I was a gamble on the Ohio State. I could have picked somebody else, but figured Ohio
Right.
State was probably a safe arch rival.
Yeah, totally.
So you ended up in Oklahoma,
right?
And one of the questions I had earlier was, I had a question earlier I was going to ask you, and that was you're on NPR here at KOW in Seattle, but you're also in Tulsa, and I didn't draw the connection there. That's Oklahoma. Makes sense. Right. And you raised your family in Oklahoma,
right?
And then you were kind of given a job opportunity that many people probably wouldn't have taken, because your husband stayed in Oklahoma for 4 years to finish up because he was a professor at that time, and you came to Seattle. So what were your first years in Seattle like? What, because this is the Washington State thing. So like, what did you grew up in Detroit, you've been in Tulsa. I don't know if you'd ever been out here to Seattle, and I'm in Wenatchee, so I'm not out there, but I don't know that you had you been to Seattle before?
Yes, I came to Seattle because my younger daughter dropped out of college after her sophomore year at the University of Chicago and moved out here. Okay. Because her high school drama teacher was here and said, "Oh, Katie, you can sleep on the floor, in my apartment." So Katie did all of the, worked at the market and waited on tables at the Crocodile, all of that.
Okay.
And so I came out to see Katie, and the reason, the job offer came from somebody that I had worked with in Tulsa at the library, who had come out here to be the assistant director of the Seattle library. And so when I came out, of course, I saw him, we got together to, just sort of, because we were good friends. And he said, "Nancy, what if I come up with a job that does, let you do everything that you're good at doing, and you don't have to do anything that you're bad at doing?" And there are many things that I'm bad at doing, which he knew about. But the things that I was good at doing, sort of made a good fit for being the director of the Washington Center for the Book, because one of the things that I am good at doing is talking about books, and, talking about, without hectoring or lecturing, talking about, the joy of reading. So those first few years were spent doing, going out to book clubs, meeting with book clubs, talking to book. I always said I was like a book club social worker, that people would ask me, they all had basically the same two issues. One was there was always somebody in the group that talked too much, and how could they handle that? And then the other thing is, what makes a book good for a book group? And I had opinions on both those things. So I spent a lot of time going to various book groups all through King County. Okay. And then speaking at different libraries. I remember the first person who asked me to come speak was the director of the Everett Library. And of course, this was way before MapQuest or any of these things. And so I had this kind of record that I would never, I would get to the place and then I would never go back the same way because of my inability to follow a map and to sort of understand if you turned right to get to somewhere, then to get back, you turn left. So I I appreciated roads like the Bell Red Road that goes, between Bellevue and Redmond, because it, spoke for itself. But I still meet people who talk about, I came to their book group, and and that was a long time ago, because, I've been here almost 30 years in May.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And, I went to the Tacoma Library a couple times
the main branch, the big one, the big Carnegie one. Yeah.
Book clubs, yeah. To do book talks, and yeah. And it was just to get people, to help people realize, and most people knew this, but that the library is the most important public building, certainly in any city of any size. So, and the wonders that the library had. And then I, very soon after, well, sort of maybe 5 years after I got there, I started teaching part-time at the at UW's now Information School.
Okay.
So anyway, that's what I did.
So you moved to Seattle in the 90s when the music scene was at its pinnacle, probably, for Seattle. Seattle was a very different city then than it is now. I was living in Seattle at that time, and I loved living in Seattle. I loved living in Seattle. I had a great little place in West Seattle on the water. That I had a duck to go through the doorways. It was just a little beach cabin, and it was. I remember people thinking I was crazy because I paid $600 a month rent. Now it'd be, who knows what it'd be, but it was a lot. But so here's a question I have. I mean, I got so many questions, but this is a question I have. So I don't want to say you're a librarian, like as a moniker to like hang on your shoulders and say you're a librarian, but you're a librarian. You worked in libraries a number of years, and yet you have a Wikipedia page. There's a TED Talk that you've done.
TEDx, right?
Archie McPhee puts together the librarian superhero modeled after you.
Right.
How did the University of Michigan prepare you for these things? I kid, but how did you?
Right.
Do
you remember that? That old book about, do what you love and the money will follow.
Right.
Just do what you love. I was fortunate enough to have as my supervisors, especially the guy who came here to be the assistant director, who appreciated what I could do. Mm-hmm. And I managed to make of the job, I just could tailor it to what I did best.
Okay.
And I was incredibly fortunate, and couldn't have happened to a nicer person. That's what I say.
There you go. I like that. I mean, you've won a number of awards. There's a scholarship that's in your name for local authors. No.
My husband, because the profession of being a librarian really was so good to me, because I loved it. My husband and I set up an endowment at the University of Washington Information School.
Okay.
For people who want to go into public library work.
So just total random thing. What was your husband a professor of?
He was a professor. He's a Buddhist. He was a professor of human development and something called transpersonal psychology at Oklahoma State University. So he is probably the only Buddhist on the faculty.
Huh. I got nothing to add to that.
He is an optimist, and I am a pessimist.
Oh, family dinner's got to be a lot of fun at your house.
Right. Yeah.
So you're the first guest I've had on that people have published some of your quotes.
Yes.
I'm taken aback by this. I've had other guests on with Wikipedia pages. I've had other guests on with TED or TEDx talks. The combination of your portfolio, if you will, is really quite staggering to me.
Me too.
This is a quote that the people that know you they're all going to know this. I believe they're all going to know this quote, but I want to go a little deeper. So it says, I just said, well, the real people performing miracles every day are librarians. And we all laughed ourselves off our chairs. Can you put context around that for us?
Well, that was the start of the very first Librarian Action Figure, which came out in the fall of 2003, which was when the first Booklust book that I wrote was published by Sasquatch, both in the month of September. And the Librarian Action Figure came about because the head of Archie McPhee, the owner of Archie McPhee, we were at a dinner party together, and he was talking about, people writing and saying that the Jesus action figure was performing miracles for them.
Okay.
And that's when I said, but people who really perform miracles are librarians. And then somebody else said, oh my God, Mark, you should do a librarian action figure, and Nancy should be the model for it. And and then it happened, and it sold, like a gazillion copies of that first, $9.99 or $8.99 action figure in 2003. It was great.
Mark has been a guest on before, and he's a character.
Yeah.
And so what I'm picking up here, though, is that statement coupled with Mark, what I believe Mark's personality is. Yeah, it was inevitable. Once you said it, he was going to run with it. I mean, right. So I think that's hysterical. So I'll ask you a question that I ask authors a lot. And I'll ask you this question about your books too in a second. But so I'd like to ask you very specifically about this action figure. Where were you the first time you saw it?
Where was I the first time I saw it? Well, I think they had sent me photos of, I went to Mukilteo to be digitized, which if I ever write, yeah, that's a good response. If I ever write a memoir, which I'm not going to write a memoir, but if I ever did, I think that would be the first line. I went to Mukilteo to be digitized. I don't know when I first saw it, but I have to say that night, as we were driving home, my husband said to me, that dinner party night when somebody said, oh, you should be my husband said, his 4 favorite words to me. Now, there are people, I'm sure there are husbands who have, different 4 favorite 4 words that they say to their wives. My husband's 4 favorite words to me are, Nancy, think this through. And he said, Nancy, think this through. Do you really want to be a 5-inch non-biodegradable plastic action figure? And I said, oh, my response to everything is, oh, don't even think about it. It'll never happen. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold,
it happened. And not only did it happen, it was a hit.
It was
so much so that they've come out with an updated version.
Yeah,
I just think
2 updated versions.
2 updated, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's. I'm sorry. That's just it's. You're the first guest that's had an action figure. I don't know that I'm going to have other guests with action figures. I don't know. I just think that I think my career as a podcast host is complete now. I think we can just.
Well, people always ask, people often refer to it as a bobblehead, and I would never have done a bobblehead.
It's not a bobblehead. No, it's
totally
not a bobblehead.
No.
So did you buy a bunch and give them away? Did you send them to people?
I did not have to do that because other people were, people have said, do you know how many action figures I got when I graduated from library school? Because it was a perfect,
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Right,
right.
Oh. So, and the one of the things that the big criticism was they didn't like what I was wearing because they thought it was dowdy. And in fact, it was, a very nice outfit from Eileen Fisher, which I had, and which doesn't translate into plastic very well. So that's why when we did the latest one with the cape, then I could wear jeans. So, which is what I mostly wear. So people didn't like how dowdy it was, and that was just ridiculous. But
okay, when I was a young kid, I don't recall, and I went to a lot of libraries. I mean, I don't recall any librarian necessarily being a fashion plate, and that's fine. And they were kind of more subtle, so I don't know that that's. And I haven't been in a physical library in a number of years. I take my mom to the Wenatchee Library regularly so that she can get books, but. So this is where like I think I warned you, like we're going to go off the rails. So I have you may choose not to respond to this question. What is your opinion? Is it good? It's not. I'm not trying to make this a black or white question. So, but is the and I'm going to use the name of a specific thing here, but it applies to all platforms. Is the Kindle Reader good for books, or is it harmful?
Oh, I think it's I actually think it's good for books. I think it's good for reading. I very seldom sleep the whole night through and spend many hours reading on my Kindle in the middle of the night, so I don't have to turn on a light to read for a physical book. I mean, maybe it's neutral. Maybe it's neither good nor bad. It certainly adds a different dimension. There are books. I don't read. Let's see. I love my Kindle because I can underline in it.
Okay.
And I don't like writing in physical books. Okay. So, there's that. There are people who find that reading nonfiction, the author, an author that I talked to said that he loves reading nonfiction on his Kindle because he can underline, and that makes it, easier. Mm-hmm. But for me, what I tend to read on Kindle are just kind of books, mysteries.
Summer beach type book, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you could. Yeah, I don't normally go that far.
Okay.
into fiction, but yeah, that kind of book.
So I remember when e-readers were coming out and they weren't really standard, and I was like, who? No, I want books. I want a book. I want to hold the book. I will never do that.
Right.
That's all I read on. And it's.
I mean, the bad thing about it, not bad, but an unfortunate side effect of the Kindle is that you don't have to go to the library, and you can get library books. I mean, that's wonderful. And it was certainly wonderful. All the ebooks that are available that libraries have. It was certainly wonderful during the pandemic when libraries were closed. But the danger is that people get out of the habit of going to the library. And there are books, like last night I was reading this amazing, heartbreaking novel called I Am the Light of This World by a writer named Michael Parker. This came out last year, I think fall of 2022, and I hadn't read it. And I started reading it in the middle of the night. And then I realized that I needed to see the physical book, because it was just so gorgeously written and so heartbreaking that that reading it on a Kindle wasn't doing it any favors, So I go back and forth. When I travel, like everybody now, I take my Kindle and not any physical books.
Well, you can carry, I think I have 3,000 books on my account,
Right.
It's just, it's like, the good thing about that is that I have 3,000 books on the account. The bad thing is I have 3,000 books on the account.
Right.
I tend to feel even more distracted because I've got other choices waiting. If this doesn't grab me at the moment, I jump over to something else.
Right.
All right.
And I also listen. I'm a huge audio book person. And sometimes I think that I love listening to books even more than I love reading them. But going back to that same Michael Parker book, I Am the Light of This World, I don't think I could listen to it, because I needed to savor the words in a way that it's hard to savor when you're listening.
I was going to just ask you about audiobooks and books. Have you ever read a book and then listened to the audio, or vice versa? Have you ever consumed
Often?
Okay. So to me, it's oftentimes a very different experience. I read, actually I listened to it first, was A Gentleman in Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a beautiful book to listen to. A truly beautiful book. I enjoyed the story a great deal. And then I bought the Kindle book, and I enjoyed it in a completely different way. And it was good that way too. And as much as this can be not a good thing in some ways, maybe, but I kind of hope that ends up being a movie, because I think it's a great story that would do well on the screen too. But that was the first book for me that I went, boy, these are just they're the same. It's the same story. It's the same words going through my brain and triggering different thoughts and emotions. And so now when I find a book, I tend to read first most of the time, but then I'll go grab the audio copy of it and listen to it, or at least try to listen to it. I think I read very fast. So an audiobook kind of can drag sometimes. Other times it's even better, but yeah. So you do the audiobook thing too. Okay.
And mostly the audiobooks that I do are books that I've already read.
Okay.
And then mostly when you're reading a book, when you're physically reading a book, it's between you and the author. The two of you are creating the book that you read. And when you're listening, you've now added a third person into that conversation. And so often, whether you like a book or not will depend on whether you like the reader. So, one of my all-time favorite authors to listen to and to read is Terry Pratchett. I don't know if you've read any of his.
Long time ago.
Yeah. So I probably listened to maybe 12 Terry Pratchett books that are my favorite, once a year at least, because just listening, you can really you can appreciate the humor and the satire even more than you can when you're reading. So to reread something, go do it through my listening audio.
So how do you consume audiobooks? I mean, do you have it on your phone, or do you play it?
Yeah. So I do these sort of monster walks. I'm a late adopter of audiobooks, well after everybody else was listening.
Sure.
But especially during the pandemic, well, I would say maybe the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing these long, like 7.5-mile walks every day. And I listen to books. And, when you're listening to a Terry Pratchett book and you don't want it to end and you don't want to stop, you just walk a little further. Another author that I listen to over and over and over again is a woman named Georgette Heyer, who is kind of the best known. She invented the Regency romance. But she was a fantastic historian as well. Anyway, so I listened to all of those, and that's one way that I can consume all of these books. Like right now I'm going through, I've read all of the Agatha Christie books several times, Agatha Christie mystery several times, but now I'm listening to her oeuvre. And because they're all like 6 or 7 hours long, I have arranged my life in such a way that I can basically do a book a day if I want to. So I, consume a lot on these walks. And then, because I'm basically retired. So I spend a lot of time doing 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles, which also means that I can listen when I'm doing the jigsaw puzzles.
All right. Do you listen? Do you ever speed them up?
No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say I stick in like a basketball podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because that's when my favorite podcaster is on. So I have to stick that in, which is probably slowing down a little bit the getting through her oeuvre.
All right. So I was going to bring this up later, but you dropped the ball, so to speak. When we talked on the phone, you said to me you don't listen to a lot of podcasts,
right?
But you listen to a football and a basketball podcast,
right?
And I'm stereotyping you. That's not what I would have expected you to say you were listening to. So, and you also said you like pro football and pro basketball,
right?
We might have a little bit of friction here because I'm a longtime Sonics fan, and I feel very bitter about that.
Oh, me too.
Who are you following? I'll put you on the spot. Who's your favorite NBA team?
Oh, my favorite NBA team, Golden State, and because of the coach, because I think Steve Kerr is absolutely just wonderful, and I think I can tell that's not your favorite.
Well, too close to Seattle. It's just, but okay, the Golden State Warriors. Okay, what about your favorite football team?
Well, the Detroit Lions.
Well, see, I was thinking maybe you were going to say the Detroit Pistons, to be fair.
Yeah, but really, what I like about football and basketball, I'm like in it for the people. Okay. Like for the soap opera. Somebody once said that. I'm like in it for the soap opera. So I mean, I want Golden State to win, and I want the Lions to win, but I don't really care. I just like finding out. I like the fact that Klay Thompson, came back from these more than 2 years debilitating injuries. I mean, I'm interested in, I'm just interested, I'm interested in people in general.
Okay.
And I don't know any of these people at all, but I like, I'm a character person. I'm a character person in my reading, and I'm a character person in my life. Like the baristas at my Starbucks that I go to every day, because it's halfway on my 7-mile journey. I mean, I'm like their grandmother, like I love them, and they love me, and I care about them, and I know about them. And it's, very hard when one leaves, because, like, oh my gosh. So I just like, I'm interested in people, and yeah.
So how do you consume sports? TV? Do you like to go to games in person? Do you listen to it on the radio?
TV. Like, I don't like to go out at all of the house.
Okay. So other than the 7-mile walk every day.
Other than the 7-mile walk. Right.
Okay. So TV. Yeah. So I love baseball, and I think I get more enjoyment out of a baseball game when I just read the stats.
Yeah.
The next day. I, as a kid, grew up, my parents had a friend who had a subscription to Sports Illustrated, and he would give me all his old Sports Illustrated. Right. So I would lug them home and devour them from cover to cover. And,
me too.
And, and then I would grab the paper and read, the stats. It was just the stats for me that it got me hooked on, and the history of baseball, the characters in the sport, not always good characters. So you mentioned Steve Kerr, which, I'll give you credit. He seems like a good human being. Is there one athlete that you, current or past, that you would like to sit down and have a meal with?
Good question. There isn't anybody that comes to mind. Okay. I mean, I think like going to dinner with Greg Popovich and Steve Kerr, that would be really interesting.
Okay.
I know as soon as we stop this, I'm going to think of somebody that I would love to meet. Oh, well.
I'm going to share this one. This is, so back in the 90s, for fun, I worked at Egghead Software. You remember Egghead Software back in the 90s? And I worked at the store over on Bellevue by the Microsoft campus. Microsoft people all the time coming in. That was fine. And there was a game called Hardball 5, which was a baseball simulator. And when it was slow in the store, we'd load up a copy of it, and me and another guy that became good work buddies, and we would always play home run derby. Okay. So we'd be, I'll be, insert name of a Mariner today, and you insert name of, Red Sox today. And we'd see how many home runs we could hit. And so one day we were getting it set up, and I turn around, and in the front door of the store comes Edgar Martinez. And the guy I was working with, his name was Joey, change it to Edgar. Edgar comes in, and he's looking for software for his wife. And he walks over to the computer. And I wish I could do Edgar's voice. I just can't. But you know how Edgar's got that Puerto Rican dialect, just how he talks. And he goes, "Is that me?" And we're like, "Yeah." He goes, "Can I try?" "Sure." So here's Edgar Martinez playing Edgar Martinez. And it was just, and so we're just standing there, and, this is before cell phones, and this is before, we could live stream it, and the world would become, oh my gosh. And so he finishes up, and he goes, "That's pretty realistic. It looks pretty good." And so he's checking out, and I said, "Hey, can I bug you?" And he goes, "Yeah, what's up?" I go, "Can you autograph a box for me?" He goes, "Sure." So he autographed, and we go, "Hey, just autograph them all." And he autographed all the boxes in the store. Wow. I would love to sit down with Edgar Martinez and repeat that story, because I remember like it was yesterday. He probably won't. Right. But Edgar, if you're listening, I've tried to reach you. Please come on the show. But that's, for me, Edgar Martinez would be or Roberto Clemente would be my two. So you're a book person, you're a librarian, you're a superhero. Not that these are mutually exclusive, but how did you get into sports?
Oh, well, I grew up in Detroit when the Tigers were pretty good, and we did go to Tiger Stadium occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
My father was a huge roller derby fan. And so my sister and I became huge roller derby fans too, that we would watch on television, and again, it's the roller derby, it's the people,
mm-hmm.
The women who were doing roller derby then, and, it's their stories and their background and all of that. And so that was how, that was pretty much how I think was, roller derby, the Pistons, Isaiah Thomas, the Bad Boys,
right.
Michigan, the Fab Five, all of that.
Yeah, you've had that Detroit area had we won't talk about the Tigers right now, but
right.
Had great success in the Lions. I'm sorry, the Lions aren't.
Yeah, they'll be good this year though.
They're kind of like a jinxed team or something. They just can't seem to catch a break. Kind of like the Mariners were for 21 years.
Right. Right.
So I just think when you mentioned sports on the first phone call, I was just like, huh? And I think it's, so the podcast that you listen to, what is it about the podcast? Are they team specific podcasts, or are they league specific? Or,
well, I did used to listen to team specific podcasts.
Okay.
But then I decided, well, the one that I listen to now pretty much is, I'm the only basketball podcast that I'm listening to currently is the Hoop Collective, which is Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays now. Brian Windhorst is the host, and there's, not a lot of, good old boys, ha ha ha. I mean, there's a lot about people, the football players and what's happening, and and what's going to happen. And I think I listen to that.
Okay.
I listen to the NFL Today.
Okay.
Which
so
it's hard listening to football in the off season.
Oh, it is. I enjoy football in the off season.
Yeah.
I'm kind of enjoying this whole free agency thing right now. And the hope that the Seahawks will, I don't know, make a big splash in the draft. It's like spring training for baseball. It's like they're undefeated. They're going to win it all. And then they come out and they don't.
Yeah.
So you're a writer, and you're a reviewer. You have a TV show. We'll call it a TV show. You started writing years ago, right?
Yes.
Okay. What was the inspiration to be a writer, besides a reader, but writing?
So when I was a kid, I wrote, I wrote poetry mainly, and and got certain awards for that, but poetry just sort of came naturally to me. It was something that I mean, they weren't bad poems for a depressed 13-year-old. And so I wrote poetry all through college. And then into my 30s, I was still writing poetry, but then the lines that came into my head did not seem to me to be lines of poetry. They seemed to me to be lines of prose. And so for, a long, long, long time, I have not written any poetry.
Okay. Do you think that might happen again?
I don't know. It's interesting.
Okay. So the lines are still prose right now for you.
The lines seem to be still prose.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still have one unfinished poem from like 30 years ago.
Do you ever go back and look at it? And
yeah, I think about it all the time.
Do you? And
I think
nothing in 30 years is
what to do with it.
Nothing's popped in 30 years.
No.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And then, the book list books, the 4 books of book recommendations, that was really the brainchild of the then an editor at Sasquatch Books here in Seattle, Gary Luke, called me and said, because I was then on KUOW and just doing, sort of making a kind of name for myself doing book, talking about books. And he said, I'd love it if you could do just a book of book recommendations, 300 different quirky categories, 300 words, in each category. And I mean, it just seemed like, I just sort of sat at my computer and looked at my bookshelves and came up with categories, and it was so much fun to write. And then followed that up with more Book Lust, which is really just an awful, what a boring title. I had wanted it to be called Book Lust 2 the Morning After. But they felt that wasn't such a good idea. So it was Book Lust, more Book Lust. And then I did one for kids called Book Crush. And then I did Book Lust to Go, which is adventure, travel, adventure, armchair travel, all of that. And so those 4, those were just great. The last one was Book Lust to Go, was published in 2010. Okay. But they're just, they're all my favorite books. I love them. I love all the books there.
So I know what I'm about to ask you. It's probably not impossible, but it's probably going to be darn difficult. Over your lifetime, how many books do you think you've completed? Read all the way through? Because one of the things you talk about is not having to read a book just because you started it. And I love and I'm going to ask you to just, you have this little formula.
Right.
So, but through your years of reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you just said you 300 books, and you looked around your house. So I've got this vision that you've got a lot of books. I mean, you're sitting in front of a bookcase.
That was, I looked at the books on the shelf, and they reminded me of other books.
Okay, but the point,
I'm not a book collector in any way, shape, or form.
Even though you're sitting in front of a bookcase right now. Anyway, I'm kidding. Right. So, how many? What do you think? Do you have a wild guess?
No. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. It's weird.
Okay, so.
Basically, Scott, that is all that I have ever done. Is period. I'm no good at parties or anything like that, because all I can talk about is books.
Okay. Well, I think you're being a little too hard on yourself.
Well,
so can you please explain your formula to the audience?
Yes. So my belief is that you should not force yourself to finish a book if you're not enjoying it. And on KUOW, Steve Scher, who was the host that I was on most frequently with, once a month, we would do an hour show, and we would take phone calls. And one day this woman called and said, I'm reading this book that I'm not liking, but I feel too guilty to give up on it. How many pages should I read before I can? So I came up with this, basically like for a joke, although it has been taken so seriously now, that if you're 50 and under, you should give a book 50 pages. And at the bottom of page 50, you should ask yourself, am I enjoying this book? And if you are, go on and read it. If you're not enjoying it, stop. The government knows a lot about us, but they don't know whether we've returned a book unfinished to the library or not.
Well,
No.
Now with ebooks, they probably do.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
But this was like pre.
yeah.
um, and then if all you care about, you're like at 50 pages, and you wonder, well, who the murderer is, turn to the last page. Or maybe all you care about is who marries whom, turn to the last page. I mean, basically, if it's not on the last page, do the penultimate page, and then the anti-penultimate, until you find out what it is you want to know. But there's reading should be a joy.
Mm-hmm.
It should not be a feeling that, oh my God, I've got to get through this book. So that worked. That 50-page rule worked really well until I started getting older, and then much older. And so I added a second half to that. And so if you're 51 and up, subtract your age from 100. And that number, which gets smaller every year as time gets shorter every year, that number is the number of pages you should read before you guiltlessly give up on a book. And then when you turn 100, you can legitimately judge a book by its cover, which I thought was pretty funny and clever. But I don't know if you remember, several years ago now, Starbucks put authors' quotes on their cups, and
Yes.
so that 50-page rule quote is on a venti cup, actually 69, cup 69.
Are you kidding me?
Nope.
Oh, wow. Okay. So as a reader, as you've gotten older,
Right.
are you less forgiving of a book?
Oh my God, yes.
Okay.
I mean, many is the time that I will read, I don't know, 13 page. I mean, and not corresponding to my age, but like read. I will read a book until I get annoyed with either the authorial quirks or something about the book I'm not enjoying, or it's getting too weird or scary, and
Okay.
then I'll stop. And
Okay.
most often now what I'll do is just read the last page to see what happens and skip all the middle parts. But a book that I love, that I'm going to be talking about on, book talks to people, then I read the whole book. But
Right.
time is really short, and there's, these are all pre-publication books that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you've written a novel.
Right.
As the author of the novel, so once again, I ask these questions that are not intentionally hard. I just know as soon as I'm going to say, oh my God, these are really putting the guest on the spot, but what the heck? Are you happy with the way the novel turned out?
I actually love George and Lizzie. I love the characters in George and Lizzie. And in many ways, I was thrilled that it was published by Simon and Schuster. Mm-hmm. I thought, they did a great job. I had the best editor there, the person who, bought the book for Simon and Schuster. She just was terrific.
Okay.
I mean, just absolutely wonderful. And yet, in a way, I wish it hadn't been published, because I would love to go on writing about them, because I still think about George and Lizzie all the time. And the book started because these characters just came into my head, and I would tell myself stories about them when I was falling asleep. And just over and over and over again, I would tell myself, these stories, and not writing anything down for years. And then one day I was going through, we go through these periodic times when you can't find anything good to read, good to read, that you're looking for a book and there's nothing that is satisfying that need for a particular, whatever the particular kind of book is. And, that was happening to me. And, I would look at my bookshelves, I would go to the bookstore, I would go to the library. I just couldn't find anything. And then I thought, oh my God, in my head, I have a book that I would love. And I started writing, that night I started, I sat down and wrote, the first sentence of the book, which begins, chapter 1, how they met. And
it wasn't a dark and stormy night.
Yeah, right. It's a very quirky, there are people who loved it, and there are people who it was too character driven, people like books and need books for different reasons.
Sure.
And I was, prepared for people not to like it. As a librarian and knowing my own reading of what I like and what I don't, I wrote a book that I would like to read.
Now, I got to ask you, I haven't read the book. So, you said in a way you wish it hadn't been published because you could keep on writing about them. Why couldn't you tell another story with them?
Yeah, right. So one of the things that I've been thinking about doing, and I'm not thinking about that unfinished poem in my head. I think about one of the kind of minor characters in George and Lizzie. There's a guy named Maverick, who was a football player, a high school football player, and then a not very successful college player. And then I thought, gee, it would be really great, or wouldn't it be fun to see him at age like 40, never having become the kind of player that, he never, being a good high school player, but not going to Ohio State or Michigan. It's set in Ann Arbor.
So if he was going to go to Ohio State, he wasn't going to be a very good football player.
Right, exactly. Okay. And he didn't go to Michigan, but he, and he was kind of a journeyman football player. And when and I see him now as being a podcast host, sports podcast host in Seattle. And, that would give me a chance to really, make fun of, play with how much fun it would.
I'm not taking any offense to this at all.
Right. Well, you're not a sports podcast, so.
No.
Anyway, but then I think in some ways I've locked him into a particular age and whatever because of George and Lizzie. And I haven't yet figured out, or it's a lot of work to write fiction. It's really hard. So anyway, but I think about Maverick a lot.
Okay. On the Seattle channel, your book Lust with Nancy Pearl. You sit down and you interview authors.
Right.
How long have you been doing this show?
Since 2004.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What about it do you enjoy? You've been doing it almost 20 years.
Yeah, right. I enjoy talking to the authors about not necessarily focusing on the book, that we have in front of us, but just finding out the kind of people that they are.
Okay.
I mean, really, for me, it always comes back to the people.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Okay. I asked you if there was an athlete that you would want to meet. Is there an author, past or present, that you'd want to?
Yeah. So years and years ago, I interviewed Terry Pratchett, which was really, but in fact, it probably isn't a bad interview, but I fawned over him. I mean, I didn't ask him. I mean, like I would always assign my students when we were talking about fantasy and science fiction in the classes that I taught at UW, I would always ask my students to watch that interview because there was a lot about fantasy and all that. And, my students would always say, "Oh my God, Nancy, it was just sickening because you just fawned over him." And plus, I mean, I just would have loved to just talk to him more. I mean, he was a brilliant writer. And it would be a better world if everybody read Terry Pratchett's, especially the ones with Sam Vimes. So I would love to see him again. But he's dead, so that will not be possible.
Right.
Oftentimes the half an hour is just the right amount.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And sometimes it isn't enough, and sometimes it's too much. So
I also saw somewhere and I'm going to butcher what you were, the phrase that you were credited with is something about you recommended Neuromancer by William Gibson.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I interviewed William Gibson and it wasn't for the TV show, it was for a public thing. And I don't get nervous, anymore. Like I interviewed Tom Hanks at the Seattle Opera House a couple of years ago for his collection of short stories. And I really don't get nervous about that, about interviewing. But I was really nervous about William Gibson because I figured he didn't suffer fools gladly. And I didn't want, to ask stupid questions. Mm-hmm. So that was a little bit challenging. But I came to William Gibson only after I had fallen in love with Neal Stephenson's Cryptonomicon, which is, again, one of my, I would say, 10 all-time favorite books.
Wow.
I loved Cryptonomicon. And because it's a historical novel. It's
it's great. It's a great book.
Yeah, it's a great book. And Neuromancer, really the kind of punk part of science fiction, I think was really great in those books.
Have you read Gibson's other works?
I read some, mostly, yes, I have. Okay. Yeah.
I enjoy his books I have a very awkward relationship with them. They're just kind of, I feel like I'm riding a car with bad shocks on a dirty road or dirt road. I'm bouncing around. I'm not quite sure. And he weaves things together. When I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I first read that, and it was so groundbreaking. Sounds a little grandiose,
no, it was groundbreaking,
but it really was, and it was like, wow. And I'm not a science fiction fan.
Yeah,
I really Neal and William Gibson are the only two authors that I read. That way. So you interview. Wow, that's very cool. So we've talked about you this whole show. We really haven't talked about Washington State, which is really unusual for me. We got to talk about Washington State for a little bit. You say you go on long walks and halfway through you go to Starbucks. I know you're a tea drinker though. So you're not going there for coffee, are you?
No.
Okay. But you also told me on the phone that your granddaughter brought coffee into the house.
She did.
Didn't work on you? Couldn't convert you over to the...
No. No.
So what do you drink at Starbucks? What's your go-to drink when you're on a walk?
Oh, this is all I ever get at Starbucks. So it's an English breakfast tea, a tall English breakfast tea in a venti cup with water almost up to the top, and 3 Splendas and some very foamy steamed non-fat milk that they can scoop on.
Interesting.
I'm really an Anglophile, so it's always
interesting. Okay. All right. You stumped me. I don't have a retort. I've never heard anybody drink a beverage. So I used to work at Starbucks
Oh,
in the corporate offices many years ago, and part of the training back then, and part of the reason I wanted to work there was that I got this coffee training because I love coffee, and part of my initiation to the the company, I had to go work in one of the stores. I had to go work in the store in West Seattle just for a night. I only had to do a night, and I think this person must have been a plant. I think they must send this person into all new breweries. And I can't remember what it was, but I'm not exaggerating when I say it was like, I had like a venti mocha with 6 shots of this and 4 pumps of that and 2 Splendas and a sweet and low and pure cane sugar. But you need to put it in this. And it was like, why would,
right,
I like black coffee, but but your drink, I've never heard that combination. It's pretty interesting, actually. So I don't think I'm offending anybody when I say Starbucks isn't really known for tea. Where's a great place for tea in Seattle?
Oh, see, I only go to Starbucks.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't go to the, so what tea do you drink at home? Do you drink tea at home?
Well, I drink Trader Joe's Irish breakfast tea.
Okay. So you're not somebody that's going to go to these like coffee shops. I mean, no disrespect to tea, but like these high-end coffee shops that are very,
Right. No, I'm just a creature of habit.
Okay. All right.
And I know about all the union issues, et cetera, that are bedeviling.
Yeah. I mean,
and my sympathies are with the baristas. So
they work really hard for what they do.
They do.
They work really hard for what they do. I remember, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but if you were to buy a latte at Starbucks, a tall latte, what do you think the most expensive component of that latte was?
The barista's time.
No, the cup.
Oh, the cup. Huh.
Yeah, the barista was like 7th or 8th on the list.
Oh, wow.
The cup was the bulk. The coffee and the barista are much lower. It was like cup, milk, lid, coffee, barista. I mean, some were like that. It was I was dumbfounded when I found out that the cup was the most expensive thing. Anyway, okay. When you're not reading, which this might also go to a dead end too, but when you're not reading, what do you like to do for fun? What do you and your husband like to go do?
Walk.
Mm-hmm. Does he go with you on your walks normally?
On Sunday. He's a bicyclist.
Okay.
And his goal is when he turns 80, he wants to have ridden 80,000 miles. So,
wow. Okay.
Which he will do.
Has he ever done the Seattle to Portland?
Oh, we both of us did it twice.
Okay. Did you complete it in one day, or was it 2 days?
No, not one day. I'm a slow but steady rider.
That's all that matters.
But it got too dangerous to bicycle, which is why I started walking.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I felt too scared on my bike, but he continues to bike. Yeah, like my ideal vacation is to go to England and walk on one of the national paths that they have, or do a canal walk. Like one year we walked from Leeds to Liverpool, which is about 150 miles on the canal, on the towpath next to the canal.
That would be interesting. Did you ever stay in one of the canal boats? Have you ever? No,
but we were invited aboard to see what it was like, and then they took us some way about a couple miles down the canal, so we could see what it was like. I'd love to do that, but I really love to walk more. So
in the photos I've seen of you, you appear to be short.
I am very short.
Okay,
getting shorter every day.
And I'm very tall, so these boats don't sound like they'd be fun for me.
Right.
Did it seem claustrophobic to you, though?
It is a little claustrophobic. They are narrow boats because the canals are narrow. Mm-hmm. You probably would not enjoy it.
Yeah, I love the idea of it. I just don't think the reality for me is okay. So typically wrap these up because I want to respect your time. We've run all of it. So couple of questions. Number one, what didn't I ask you that I should have asked you that we should have brought up?
I don't think there's anything, really. I don't think there's anything. I think we had a nice, wide-ranging discussion.
That's the goal. Okay. All right. This is a very important question. Cake or pie, and why?
Okay. I would say cookies. But if I have to choose between cake and pie, I would say, or that's harder, because I was going to say cake because of the frosting.
Okay.
But pie because you can get such good like apple pie and I don't know. Impossible. An impossible question.
So you like cookies though. So what type of cookies?
I'm not a big chocolate chip fan, but peanut butter cookies I love. And snickerdoodles I love.
Okay. All right. And if people want to find out more about you, that assuming that they, like myself, didn't know a whole lot about you before this conversation, where's a good place for people to find you online?
So I think they should just Google Nancy Pearl and it's there. I don't have a website anymore because I just wasn't doing anything with it.
Okay.
So
right. Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today. It was a lot of fun.
Yep, I agree.
Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.